Picture this. You're 5 hours deep into writing a massive 10-page essay. Suddenly, the power flickers and your screen goes completely black. Everything you've worked on all night is just gone, right? Well, actually, no. Behind every tap, click, and keystroke you make, there is an invisible, incredibly high-stakes war being fought inside your device to make sure that disaster doesn't happen.
Think about it. How does your system actually know it's you trying to log into your bank and not a hacker halfway across the world? Or how does it seamlessly heal itself after a sudden crash? The answer to all of this lies in your operating system. It's essentially your computer's ultimate invisible bodyguard. By the end of this explainer, you're going to know exactly how your OS pulls this off. We're breaking this down into 5 key concepts: the OS protection shield, proving your identity, recovering from crashes, surviving hardware changes, and finally, virtual machines and the cloud. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The OS protection shield. So what do we actually mean by protection in computer science? Put simply, protection is the underlying mechanism the OS uses to safeguard resources, stuff like your memory, your CPU time, and your personal files. It's what allows us to safely share hardware, so you can stream music on one app while typing up a document in another without them crashing into each other. It also catches accidental errors, but here is the crucial takeaway. Catching a random typo or a memory leak, that's child's play. The real, monumental challenge for your OS is stopping intentional, malicious abuses from bad actors. And to lock down those attacks, the OS needs an ironclad way to verify exactly who is using the machine.
Which brings us to Section 2, proving your identity. Let's clear up 2 terms that people constantly mix up: authentication and authorization. Think of it like a bouncer at an incredibly exclusive club. Authentication is the bouncer checking your ID at the door. Are you really who you say you are? Do you have the right password? Once you're authenticated and actually inside the club, authorization kicks in. This is the bouncer checking the VIP list to see which specific rooms you're allowed to enter. Are you authorized to edit a critical system file, or are you only authorized to read it?
For that first step, authentication, simple passwords used to be enough. Not anymore. Today, we rely heavily on two-factor authentication, or 2FA. This is a brilliant shift because 2FA turns your physical cell phone into a literal key. A hacker can't just guess a password from afar anymore. They'd physically need to steal your device to hijack the account. And to keep you from having to pull out your phone on every single page click, the system drops a cookie in your browser. It transforms your browser session into a temporary, secure key.
Okay, so you're authenticated. You're in the club. Now for authorization. This relies on access control lists, or ACLs, which generally look like a matrix. Take a look at the root user on the top row here. They have permissions to read, write, and execute. They have total control. But a basic user down at the bottom, they're strictly read-only. In systems like Unix or Linux, this structure keeps everything perfectly organized, handing out privileges without giving every single user the keys to the entire kingdom. But you might be wondering, what part of the computer actually enforces these matrix rules? That is the security kernel. This is the operating system's absolute inner protection layer. It's a mix of hardware and software acting as the ultimate access enforcer. Because it holds total authority over memory and system interrupts, it is absolutely critical that this kernel remains incredibly small and simple in its programming. Why? Because if it were massive and complex, there would inevitably be bugs and loopholes for a hacker to exploit. So that's how the OS protects us from external threats. But what happens when the system fails from the inside?
Let's look at Section 3, Recovering from Crashes.
You're probably thinking, hold on a second. If my computer loses power literally right in the middle of a critical process, like saving that 10-page essay, how does it not corrupt the entire hard drive? It is a fantastic question. When a crash happens mid-write, it leaves your data in a highly dangerous, inconsistent state. To fix this inconsistency, operating systems generally rely on one of 3 recovery approaches. They can run a consistency check during the reboot phase, they can rigidly control the exact order of the writes, or they can perform something called write-ahead logging. Let's see how this actually plays out in practice. The oldest method here is a Unix command called FSK. When your computer boots back up after a crash, FSK aggressively scans the entire disk to hunt down and repair errors. But there are massive drawbacks here. For one, modern hard drives are huge, so scanning them takes forever. But worse than that, it actually creates security risks. If a chunk of your private password file gets orphaned during a crash, FSK might just dump that block into a random, visible recovery file, totally exposing it to unauthorized users. Because of those huge limitations, modern systems like Windows MTFS and Linux use write-ahead logging.
also known as journaling. Think of this like writing your plans down in a secure notebook before you actually execute them. Step 1, the OS records exactly what it's about to do in a separate log file. Step 2, it flushes that log info to the disk. Step 3, it finally updates the actual system blocks. If the power cuts out during Step 3, it's literally no problem. The computer just checks the notebook, that log file, when it turns back on, and quickly heals the system by finishing the job. No massive, slow disk scan required. All right, now that we understand basic recovery, let's zoom out and look at the crazy evolution of our hardware.
Moving on to Section 4, Surviving Hardware Changes.
I want you to really process the staggering number, 6,667 times. That is how much our disk capacity has increased since the 1980s, jumping from a measly 30 megabytes to well over 2 terabytes. And it is not just storage space. We've seen unbelievable hardware leaps across the board. CPU speeds are up over 160 times. Memory size? Up to 1,000 times. Network speeds skyrocketed by 1,000 times. But here is the giant elephant in the room. A lot of foundational operating system concepts were designed 30 to 50 years ago for those tiny 1980s specs. So we really have to ask ourselves, do those vintage OS ideas even work today?
Well, the answer is complicated, because old methods don't always scale perfectly. Take paging, moving data back and forth from the disk. That used to take seconds. Today, with massive 64-gigabyte memory pools, handling individual page faults the old-school way would literally take over 44 hours. It's absurd. Plus, translation look-aside buffers, which help us access memory quickly, now only cover a tiny fraction of modern RAM. And because we hit a physical power limit on how fast a single CPU can run, hardware designers had to start cramming multiple cores onto a single chip. This forces developers into parallel programming just to use those cores, which is notoriously difficult. To handle all this massive multi-core power, OS development had to dramatically shift its focus toward the data center. Which leads us perfectly into our final section, virtual machines and the cloud.
Have you ever wondered how a massive cloud provider like AWS securely shares a single giant physical server with thousands of totally different customers? They use a hypervisor, also called a virtual machine monitor. This is a layer of software that sits right on the bare hardware. It slices the server up, allocating virtual CPUs, virtual memory, and virtual disks to create completely isolated virtual machines, or VMs. Because they are strictly isolated, a process crashing in one VM absolutely cannot take down another one. It guarantees stability and security for everyone.
Now, let's clear up a massive point of confusion I see all the time. What is the actual difference between a virtual machine and a container? A virtual machine runs an entire, fully loaded guest operating system. You could literally run a Windows OS on one VM and a Linux OS right next to it on the exact same physical server. Containers, like Docker, are way lighter. They logically isolate your applications, sure, but all those apps share just a single underlying operating system.
So let's bring this back to the real world. Why is every business ditching the dusty on-premise servers in their office closets? It's all about pay-as-you-go scalability. Instead of sinking millions of dollars into physical hardware that's going to be obsolete in just 3 years, a company can spin up a virtual machine in the cloud instantly, paying only for what they actually use. It is a complete paradigm shift in how we handle computing.
All right, let's quickly recap what we've covered today. Your operating system is your shield, protecting you through authentication, like checking your ID, and authorization, using those ACL matrices. It totally saves your skin during crashes using incredibly efficient write-ahead logging. It is constantly adapting to modern multi-core hardware. And lastly, it is the invisible force powering the entire cloud economy through hypervisors and virtual machines. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. As the cloud continues to explode in size, the challenge of managing it grows exponentially. The modern data center is basically evolving into one giant unified computer. So, if you were tasked with building the next major cloud platform, how would you design an operating system to coordinate millions of virtual machines simultaneously with zero latency? Think about that, and be sure to catch our next explainer where we dive deep into the wild world of